Welcome back to Random History, the podcast where we dig up the bizarre, forgotten, and the downright weird stuff from the dusty archives of the past. I'm the navigator as we explore the little-known events and people that make history such an amazing subject. These are not the topics you would have heard about in school. In fact, if you did hear about them, you're likely to think that they could not possibly be real. But they are. Today, we're soaring into one of the sweetest stories from the early Cold War era. Picture this: a city divided, a superpower standoff, and one pilot who turned a humanitarian crisis into a candy-coated act of kindness. We're talking about the candy bomber from the Berlin Airlift. We'll start with the tense backdrop of the Berlin blockade, unpack the massive logistical miracle that was the airlift itself, and then zoom in on the one man who wiggled his wings and dropped hope from the skies. Grab your headphones, folks. This episode's about to take off. To set the stage, we'll need to rewind to the end of World War II. By 1945, the Allied powers, primarily the US, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, had defeated Nazi Germany. The war had devastated Europe, killing millions and leaving cities in ruins. Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones. The US, Britain, and France controlled the western parts, while the Soviet Union took the east. Berlin, the capital, was smack in the middle of the Soviet zone, but it also was split into 4 sectors, with the Western Allies holding West Berlin and the Soviets the east. Philosophical clashes between the capitalist West and communist East quickly turned the wartime alliance into the Cold War. The U.S. pushed for rebuilding democracies through policies like the Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, to aid Europe's economic recovery and to contain communism. The Soviets saw this as a threat. Tensions boiled over in March of 1948 when Britain, France, and the U.S. merged their Berlin sectors into a unified West Berlin. This infuriated Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, who wanted to push the Allies out and consolidate control over the entire city. On 24 June 1948, the Soviets made their move. They imposed the Berlin blockade, cutting off all road, rail, and canal access to West Berlin. Electric power was produced in the Soviet sector. It was slashed to the western half of the city. Supplies of food, coal, and other essentials ground to a halt. Over 2.5 million West Berliners were suddenly isolated, facing starvation and a harsh winter ahead. Stalin's goal? Force the Allies to abandon West Berlin or negotiate on his terms. Like withdrawing the new Deutschmark currency introduced in the western zones to stabilize the economy. It was a high-stakes gamble, turning Berlin into the first major flashpoint of the Cold War. U.S. President Harry S. Truman wasn't about to back down. He viewed staying in Berlin as crucial for U.S. prestige and containment of the Soviet expansion. Advisors floated ideas like evacuation or armed convoys, but Truman opted for a bold, nonviolent response: supply the city by air. The Allies had secured air corridors in 1945 agreements, so the Soviets couldn't easily interfere without risking war. And that's how the Berlin Airlift began. Officially, it kicked off on 26 June 1948. The U.S. dubbed the airlift Operation Vittles, a folksy name devised by Brigadier General Joseph Smith, meaning "we're hauling grub." The British called theirs Operation Plainfare. What followed was one of the most impressive logistical feats in history. Planes from Allied air bases in Western Germany flew round the clock to Tempelhof Airport in West Berlin, delivering everything from flour and coal to medicine and machinery. 2 air lanes flying into Berlin, one from the north, used mainly by the British, and the other from the south, used primarily by the Americans, and then 1 lane used for egress in the center. Air traffic flowed rather smoothly in and out of the city in a triangular route system. At first, however, it was chaotic. Pilots dealt with bad weather, overloaded aircraft, and the sheer volume needed. West Berlin required 5,000 tons of supplies daily just to survive. Challenges piled up. The cargo planes were limited in their capacity. At first, most of the planes were older C-47 aircraft, leftovers from World War II. Initially, they only had about 102 of these C-47s available, alongside only 2 of the much larger C-54 Skymasters. The 47s suffered from all kinds of mechanical issues, and there was the constant threat of Soviet harassment, buzzing aircraft, shining searchlights into the pilots' eyes, blinding them. Radar and the development of air traffic control procedures increased efficiency as well as safety. By the airlift's peak, a plane landed every 45 seconds at Tempelhof. Crews unloaded cargo in minutes before taking off again. The operation wasn't without risks. There were crashes. In fact, 31 American and British airmen lost their lives in accidents. Many airmen that survived crashes had to evade the East German or Soviet troops, or else they faced capture and imprisonment. Despite the dangers, the Allies delivered over 2.3 million tons of cargo across 277,000 sorties by the end of the airlift. To put that in perspective, that's enough coal to heat all the homes through a brutal winter and enough food to keep starvation at bay. The West also hit back with a counter-blockade on East Germany, worsening shortages there and further pressuring the Soviets. It wasn't just an Allied operation either. West Berliners rallied too. In September 1948, 300,000 protested Soviet pressure, showing their resolve against communism. The airlift became a symbol of Western determination, boosting morale and solidifying alliances. By spring of 1949, it was clear that the blockade had failed, and Stalin would lift it on 12 May 1949, after 321 days. The airlift continued until September to build stockpiles, but the main crisis was over. It hardened Europe's divisions. NATO formed in April of 1949, West Germany established their government in May, and East Germany formed theirs soon after. Amid all this geopolitical tension, however, there was a rather heartwarming twist to the story. And that is the story of the candy bomber. Lieutenant Gail S. Halverson, a 27-year-old Air Force pilot from Utah, entered the historical fray. Halverson grew up on a farm, dreaming of flying as he watched planes overhead. He got his pilot's license and joined the Army Air Corps in 1942, where he flew transports during World War II in places like England and North Africa. After the war, he stayed in the service and continued flying. In July of 1948, Halverson was rushed to Germany for the airlift, thinking it would be a short operation. He flew grueling shifts, hauling supplies. During a rare break, he hitched a ride as a passenger on one of the flights to Tempelhof and wandered over to the perimeter fence. There, he met a group of ragged Berlin kids watching the planes land through the barbed wire. Unlike kids elsewhere who begged for sweets, these children were polite, just asking that the Allies not give up on them when winter came. "We can live on little food," they said, "but if we lose our freedom, we may never get it back." Touched by this, Halverson dug out his last 2 sticks of Wrigley Doublemint gum from his pocket and shared them with the kids. The kids' eyes lit up as they carefully divided the treats, even passing the foil around so those that didn't get any gum could at least smell the mint on the wrappers. Halverson promised more the next day. "How will we know it's you?" they asked. "I'll wiggle my wings," he replied, earning him the nickname Uncle Wiggly Wings. Back at base, Halverson rallied his crew. They pooled rations, chocolate bars, and gum, and wrapped them in handkerchiefs. That's when he realized that if he dropped them from the plane at 180 miles an hour from 100 feet off the ground or so, it would, as he put it, leave the wrong impression. So he and his crew fashioned mini parachutes from more handkerchiefs. Halverson had packed a lot of them for a cold that he had. The next day, as his C-54 approached Tempelhof, he wiggled the wings and dropped the bundles. The kids scrambled joyfully below. Word spread. Crowds grew at the fence. Halverson got fan mail as the Chocolate Flyer and the Chocolate Uncle. At first, this action violated regulations and his commanding officer chewed him out. But when Berlin newspapers caught on, the airlift commander, General William Hudner, his CO's CO, greenlit it as Operation Little Vittles. It ballooned. 25 other crews joined in. Candy donations poured in from U.S. companies like Hershey and Wrigley, and school kids in Massachusetts assembled parachutes. By January 1949, 250,000 parachutes had been dropped, totaling 23 tons of sweets over Berlin. The impact? Absolutely huge. It humanized the airlift, boosting morale for kids who had endured bombing for years and deep hunger. As one Berliner later told Halverson, it wasn't just chocolate, it was hope. The drops reassured West Berliners that the West cared deeply. Halverson rotated home in 1949, married and raised a family. He earned awards like the Cheney Award, had a Berlin school named after him, and even dropped candy over Kosovo much later. He would write a memoir titled The Berlin Candy Bomber and fostered U.S.-German student exchanges. Halverson passed away in 2022 at the age of 101, but his legacy endures, a reminder that small acts of kindness can sweeten the bitterest of conflicts. Well, that's the tale of the Candy Bomber, proof that history isn't just about the big battles, but the human touches that linger. Gil Halverson's humanity left an indelible mark on history. The kids he touched were forever grateful for that simple gesture that proved, even in the harshest conditions, humanity prevails. For today's true hero, although Halverson certainly fits that bill as well, I wanted to highlight another person whose love for his fellow man helped him earn the country's highest commendation, the Medal of Honor. I'm going to take you through the remarkable life and heroic exploits of Captain Thomas Jerome Hudner, a man whose courage and selflessness earned him the nation's highest military honor, the Medal of Honor. I will outline his journey from a young boy in Massachusetts to a legendary naval aviator, focusing on the pivotal events that defined his legacy. As always, I've drawn from official military records and historical accounts to bring you this amazing story. Let's begin with his early life. Thomas Jerome Hudner Jr. was born on 31 August 1924 in Fall River, Massachusetts. Growing up in a family that valued education and service, his father was a successful businessman who owned a chain of grocery stores. Hudner attended the prestigious Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, where he excelled both academically and athletically, graduating in 1942. Inspired by the attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, he decided to pursue a military career. Hudner entered the Naval Academy in 1943, during the height of the World War II. The program was accelerated due to the war, and he graduated in 1946 with a commission as an ensign. Although the war had ended by then, Hudner was eager to serve. He initially worked in communications and public affairs, but soon sought more action-oriented roles. In 1948, he applied for flight training and was assigned to the Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida. He earned his gold wings of a naval aviator in August of 1949, and after a brief assignment in Lebanon, he joined Fighter Squadron 32, or VF-32, flying the F-4U-4 Corsair fighter bomber from the aircraft carrier USS Leyte. By 1950, the Korean War had erupted, and the USS Leyte was redeployed from the Mediterranean to the Pacific to support United Nations forces. Hudner, now a lieutenant junior grade, flew numerous combat missions targeting enemy supply lines, troop concentrations, and infrastructure. He participated in strikes over areas like the Chosin Reservoir, Takshon, and Suiniju, accumulating over 20 combat sorties by early December. The exploit that would forever etch Hudner's name in history, however, occurred on 4 December 1950, during the brutal Battle of Chosin Reservoir in North Korea. American troops were surrounded by thousands of Chinese soldiers in freezing sub-zero temperatures. Hudner and his squadron were providing close air support when his wingman, Ensign Jesse L. Brown, the first African-American naval aviator, had his plane hit by anti-aircraft fire. Brown's Corsair lost oil pressure and control, forcing him to crash land on a snow-covered mountain behind enemy lines. Circling overhead, Hudner saw that Brown was alive, but trapped in the cockpit of his smoking wreckage. Realizing the dire situation, Brown couldn't extricate himself, and enemy troops were nearby. Hudner made a fateful decision. Defying orders and risking court-martial, capture, or even death, he deliberately crash-landed his own aircraft wheels up next to Brown's to attempt a rescue. Hudner waded through waist-deep snow to reach Brown, who was pinned by a crushed leg and the damaged instrument panel. With his bare hands, he packed snow around the burning engine to smother the flames and tried desperately to pull his comrade free. Unable to free Brown, Hudner radioed for help, requesting a helicopter with an axe and a fire extinguisher. Marine Lieutenant Charlie Ward arrived in a Sikorsky helicopter, but their efforts failed. The axe barely dented the fuselage, and the extinguisher could not douse the fire. As daylight faded and temperatures plummeted, Brown's condition worsened until he succumbed to his injuries. His final words to Hudner were, "Tell Daisy," his wife, "how much I love her." With no choice, Hudner reluctantly evacuated with Ward, leaving Brown's body behind. Back on the Leyte, Hudner pleaded to retrieve Brown's body, but the mission was deemed too dangerous. A few days later, VF-32 pilots returned to the site for a warrior's funeral. They dropped napalm to destroy the aircraft and prevent enemy desecration. Brown was still in the cockpit, though much of his gear had been looted. One pilot recited the Lord's Prayer during the strike. Brown was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, and the Purple Heart for his service. For his extraordinary heroism, Hudner was recommended for the Medal of Honor, and on 13 April 1951, President Harry S. Truman presented the award to him at the White House. The official citation reads, quote, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as a pilot in Fighter Squadron 32, while attempting to rescue a squadron mate whose plane, struck by anti-aircraft fire and trailing smoke, was forced down behind enemy lines. Quickly maneuvering to circle the downed pilot and protect him from enemy troops infesting the area, Lieutenant J.G. Hudner risked his life to save the injured flyer, who was trapped alive in the burning wreckage. Fully aware of the extreme danger in landing on the rough mountainous terrain and the scant hope of escape or survival in sub-zero temperature, he put his plane down skillfully in a deliberate wheels-up landing in the presence of enemy troops. With his bare hands, he packed the fuselage with snow to keep the flames away from the pilot and struggled to pull him free. Unsuccessful in this, he returned to his crashed aircraft and radioed other airborne planes requesting that a helicopter be dispatched with an axe and a fire extinguisher. He then remained on the spot despite the continuing danger from enemy action and, with the assistance of the rescue pilot, renewed a desperate but unavailing battle against time, cold, and flames. Lieutenant J.G. Hudner's exceptionally valiant action and selfless devotion to a shipmate sustain and enhance the greatest traditions of the U.S. Naval Service." End quote. At the ceremony, Hudner met Brown's widow, Daisy, and they maintained a close friendship until her death in 2014. Hudner's act not only highlighted the interracial brotherhood in the military, but also symbolized the integration efforts post-World War II. Following the award, Hudner continued his distinguished career. He flew a total of 27 combat missions during the Korean War. Over the next 2 decades, he held various command and staff positions. During the Vietnam War, he served as the executive officer aboard the USS Kitty Hawk. Hudner retired from the Navy in 1973 after 27 years of service, achieving the rank of captain. In civilian life, Hudner remained committed to veterans' causes. He served as the Commissioner of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Veterans Services from 1991 to 1999, advocating for his fellow service members. He was also active in various veterans organizations and spoke frequently about his experiences, emphasizing themes of duty, friendship, and sacrifice. Hudner's legacy was further honored when the U.S. Navy named an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer after him, the USS Thomas Hudner. Commissioned in 2018, Secretary of the Navy Ray Mabus stated that Hudner exemplifies the values of honor, courage, and commitment the Navy holds dear. Captain Thomas J. Hudner Jr. passed away on 13 November 2017 at his home in Concord, Massachusetts, at the age of 93. He was the last living Navy Medal of Honor recipient from the Korean War. Hudner was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. In reflecting on Hudner's life, we see a man who embodied the finest qualities of American service: bravery in the face of overwhelming odds, loyalty to his comrades, and a lifelong dedication to his country. His story has been immortalized in books like Devotion by Adam Makos and the 2022 film adaptation of that book, and he continues to inspire generations of naval aviators. These stories I tell are truly inspirational for me. I hear snippets of the stories, and as I research them, I cannot help but be moved. When I was in the military, we always faced with the phrase, duty, honor, and country. The men and women I report on take that commitment to the nth degree. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I really hope they inspire you to learn more about these men. This brings us to the end of another episode of Random History. I hope you enjoyed it and will come back and listen to future episodes. If you'd like to view the transcript or sources for the episode, click on the link in the description. You can also make suggestions for future topics by clicking that same link or shooting us an email. As always, I want to thank Argos Media for producing Random History and to thank my wife for her continued support and inspiration. Until next time, make some history of your own. Navigator out.